from far right type political sources. Here's what the New York Times says, okay? The New York Times says that when it comes to testing and the numbers of people with this diagnosis, apparently the test goes through a process called amplification. And they will run it and amplify any trace of COVID that they can find. And they'll run it, they'll amplify it, and it doubles. And they'll run it again, and they'll amplify it, then it doubles. Then all of a sudden, when they go through amplification and amplification, voila, you've got a positive test, okay? Yet, even now, the New York Times admits that many of the positives that are out there are people with statistically insignificant traces of this. That's part of the natural immunity system, and that statistically insignificant trace is simply that which will not make a person sick, not send them to the hospital, not put them on a ventilator, and certainly not kill them. And so I just wonder, I don't know everything about this, but when I see that it's only 9% of what we were told, and when I hear that all of the positives are being blown way out of the roof, I ask myself, what's going on here? I know that in California, churches are shut down. And Pastor John MacArthur is now in legal conflict with civil authorities because it seems that that church there is not only being fined every day, they had their parking lot taken away, but there is a real showdown when it comes to the agenda of shutting down Christian worship. Now, excuse me, but we, in the wisdom of our founding fathers, have a Constitution with a Bill of Rights, the First Amendment of which is that Congress cannot step in and prohibit the free exercise of religion. It does not say, and trust me, I've read the Constitution, it does not say unless there's a pandemic. It does not say unless there's some other thing going on. That is something that is enshrined there, and I wonder, how's all this going to play out? And what is the real result of this going to be? How about another area where I have to ask the question, are we being deceived? And I want to invite you to consider with me the differential between Antifa versus freedom. Now, what do I mean by that? Antifa is sort of an acronym or a shortened form of anti-fascist, okay? Now, the greatest error taught in high school and in college and in politics is that there's a spectrum, and on the far right or on the far left of the spectrum is communism, but on the far right of the spectrum is fascism. That's wrong. Put fascism all the way over here to the far left on the same side as communism, because the thing they have in common is socialism. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, right? The National Socialist Party, which was Hitler's party. So essentially what has happened is a ploy or a deception to say this. If you are not subscribing to the narrative of socialism, if you, on the other hand, are an advocate of freedom, then they are calling you a fascist, okay? And as soon as that straw man is set up, as soon as that ad hominem attack is made, then it becomes a justification for shutting you down, a justification for taking your stuff, a justification for the looting and the rioting and the burning that's going on out there, because after all, these folks are trying to stop fascists. I want to tell you that I don't know any fascists. I look at the history and foundation of fascism. It actually goes before Hitler to Benito Mussolini in Italy, but you can look through that. There isn't fascism in America today. And yet, if the left can deceive you into thinking that just because you love economic freedom and you love freedom to worship and you love the constitutional form of government that you have, if they convince you that that's fascist, then they're going to shoot you down and they're going to cut you off. And so I want to say that this is a possible area of deception. And when someone calls me a fascist, I simply say, oh, what do you mean by that? What is a fascist? Ooh. You know, that's the educational level of the average college student today. Let me go on to another area. And the second area is Black Lives Matter Incorporated versus Black Lives Matter. This is a particularly insidious deception because someone will slip back and forth between these two things, and when you think you're talking about one thing, they'll move over here and they'll talk about another thing, and when you think you make an affirmation over here, then they're going to move over here. And I want us to understand, and this is very, very important, that the capital B, capital L, capital M organization, okay? Political organization that is highly organized, that is something that has a core set of beliefs, and the set of beliefs has very little to do with actual black lives and a lot to do with destroying capitalism and our free market economy and our constitutional form of government and instituting socialism. But if you say, well, I'm not for that, then all of a sudden, oh, what, you don't care about black people? You see how that deception has slipped in there. And it seems like you can't, for example, in a conversation, well, Black Lives Matter. Well, that's a great big duh. And that's where you want to affirm, as Christians, affirming the Word of God, that all lives matter, but in certain political contexts, you can't say that. And so there's a slippage back and forth. And I want to tell you that if you go to the Black Lives Matter website, I don't want to give you what others are saying about them. Go to their website, okay? It's important that you're going to see that there is an affirmation of abortion, that there is an affirmation of the tearing down of the traditional family, that there is a kind of a resistance to and an abolition to private property and to inheritance and wealth tax and freedom and all of those things. That's what that organization is, and I believe that they are masquerading in the guise of a racial question. And my question for you today is, are we being sucked in by being called people who don't care about certain segments of society, namely the black community, when in reality there is a subtle attempt to destroy the country and to make it socialist? And by the way, I'm going to add parenthetically that there is a concerted attempt to destroy, and millions of black people are being killed. It is genocide. It's happening right now. But do you know who's doing it? It's not the police. It's Planned Parenthood. Okay? So if somebody really wants to care about any lives in the black community, you go back to Planned Parenthood exterminating millions, all the way back to Margaret Sanger, who believed in eugenics because she didn't like to have black people around. Yet that is the platform of Planned Parenthood. And I want to tell you today that there is a deception. Never in your love and care for all human beings get slipped into affirming something that is Marxist, something that is socialist, and that's something that we must be very, very careful about. Again, I ask, are you being deceived? Next thing I notice is what I want to call the slide toward deviancy, okay? A slide toward deviancy. It's interesting because Romans chapter 1 talks about the judgment of God on a nation. And the refrain in Romans 1 is, God gave them up, God gave them up, God gave them up. What is it that is that judgment? What does God take them off? Well, in the first area, God gave them up to sexual revolution. And that is that there are no restraints on sexual behavior that is expressed within the safe confines of marriage, but that you've got just a free love situation, and that's the first step in the slide toward deviancy, okay? And what did we have here in America? We had in the 60s a sexual revolution. We had the hippie movement and the putting forward of the tearing down of the normal mores of marriage and the Word of God behind that, and all of a sudden it's free love. All you need is love. The Beatles kept singing over and over, and there was a sexual revolution. But the judgment doesn't stop there. Paul goes on to say that God gave them over to shameful desires and lust, men desiring men, women with women, receiving in their bodies the due penalty of their actions. Following the sexual revolution, there was a homosexual revolution. And that kind of got started and became mainstream in the 80s, okay? And what we find now is that the very definition of marriage has been altered, And then we're being told that a man can marry a man and a woman can marry a woman. And I want to tell you that a man can't marry a man if God is the originator of the definition of marriage and of the reality of marriage. A man can marry a man. That is not marriage. That's perversion. And yet today we have mainstreamed the idea so that you can't watch a sitcom, you can't see a movie, you can't partake in almost anything without there being same-sex couples that God says is perversion and is an abomination, and it has been totally and absolutely normalized. And so the slippage has continued. The slide toward deviancy has continued. We had a sexual revolution in the 60s, followed by a homosexual revolution in the 80s. And then finally, the last God gave them up. It says God gave them up, or God gave them over to a reprobate mind, okay? What is a reprobate mind? It's a mind that doesn't even work anymore. And that's where we are in the 2000s. That's when a man wakes up and says, I'm going to be a woman. I'm a woman. You got to treat me like a woman. And that's when a woman thinks a man, and transgender, and there's not two genders. It's not male and female. He created them. But what it really is hundreds of different genders and fluidity. And I could be this one day, and I could be that another day. And I got to tell you what, that's a broken mind. That's a mind that simply does not work. And yet that's the slide toward deviancy that has culminated just this week. And I want to make this message as contemporary as I can, because I want us to see these areas of attack and these areas of deception. But how many of you know that the Netflix movie company has released a movie called Cuties? French produced, apparently. And essentially, when it comes to a reprobate mind, it's not only all of this gender erasure and fluidity, but now the attempt is to normalize and sexualize children. And the point of the movie Cuties is to put children forth as sexual objects so that we can just start getting used to it. Remember, it's the old frog in the kettle. And when that becomes normalized, the agenda is to abolish all consent laws. In other words, these deviants want to make it legal to go ahead and have sex with little kids. That's where we are. And that's being endorsed in movies like Cuties. Now, I want to tell you something. I haven't seen it, but I plan to watch it. I'm probably going to skim through it because I'm not sure I want to watch it, but I don't want some dope to come up to me and say, well, have you seen it? How can you criticize it? So I'm not going to take that objection away right away. But when this happens and when society begins to normalize and sexualize children, that is the culmination of deviancy, the culmination of a reprobate mind, and I believe that we need to say something. We need to step up and we need to do something. You better believe that Netflix has heard from me. And when I wrote that little 2-paragraph letter, I put it on the little, chat that you get when you're asking questions about, issues that you have with your account, and I put it in the comment section on the website, and I put it in the email that you can email the company, and I put it out there in as many ways as I can, because I want to say, no, this has to stop. It is not right that kids are being raped and trafficked and literally killed in a sex trafficking ring because the deviancy of people that have simply lost their minds. It's insanity, and God has given them over to a reprobate mind. So if that's the way deception works, and if these are some of the onslaughts of deception today, whether it's through the virus, number one, whether it is through the incursion of Marxism, numbers 2 and 3, or whether it is a slide toward deviancy in number 4, I have to answer the question as I close our message today with, what can we do? How do we make a difference? How can we stop the deception and stand up and with clear thinking begin to speak the truth of God into the society that is getting ever more increasingly deceived? I want to give you a warning, okay? And the warning comes with the reaction you will get, I guarantee. And for those of you who might be going to Washington,